IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to All Things Policy. I am Pranay Kutastane. For a change, I am hosting this episode today. And today I have with me three guests, and none of them are from Takshashila, but they have written an excellent paper called The Legal and Regulatory Framework for Laboratory Testing in India, a case study for COVID-19. We'll link to this paper in the episode description, but it takes into account the private testing environment in India and why we've been testing so less in India for COVID-19. So it was a really interesting paper, I thought, and I thought it would be great for our listeners to hear the views of the three authors about what ails testing and particularly private labs testing in India and what are the solutions around it. So I want to welcome Harleen, Siddhartha, and Ameya. Harleen is a research fellow with NIPFP. Siddhartha is a consultant with NIPFP, and Ameya is a policy enthusiast. So welcome, folks. Welcome to All Things Policy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, folks, first, just to start off, I live in the outskirts of Bangalore, okay? And one of the things that strikes me most is the number of diagnostic labs that are there even in the outskirts. I mean, I think after alcohol shops, the most popular thing in this area is diagnostic labs, okay? So that says something about, one, what is the rate of illnesses in India as well, but it also says how that market has mushroomed. So first, let's start with this market itself. Let's not go into COVID-19, but can you tell me something about the regulatory framework for testing in India in general, not in the COVID specific case, but how many labs are there, or what's the split between private and public labs in India? How does it operate? So Siddhartha, can you give us some insights into that?
Right. So before getting into the regulation of the diagnostic labs per se, I'll just try and give you a sense of what the sector looks like.
Sure.
A majority of the diagnostic labs in India, or the majority of the diagnostic sector, is unorganized. There are a large amount of unorganized mom and pop diagnostic centers, diagnostic labs. And then we have a smaller but significant organized diagnostic sector which is characterized by a few large national chains and then similarly state chains. So these are organized sector labs which have a brand name and there are different labs in the same chain as part of the same brand. In terms of the split between public and private, I don't have an exact number, but around 70% of this sector is the private sector. So are private labs. And most of these private labs, like I said, are in the unorganized sector.
Siddharth, how do you classify between unorganized and organized? Like, what is the main difference between the two?
So the difference between the two is, this ties in with the regulatory aspect of it, right? Now, one difference is how many of these are registered and go through regular compliance. That is one criteria for it being called or it being a part of the organized sector. But in the absence of actual enforcement of regulation, there are other criteria as well, which is how big the lab is, how many different kinds of tests it offers, whether it has voluntary accreditation or not. If it has voluntary accreditation, has it gone one step ahead and gotten accreditation from, say, foreign accreditors, etc. So these are the differences between what we classify when we classify a lab to be an organized sector and an unorganized sector lab.
All right. So Siddharth, just now, given this is the sector that 70% are In the private sector, most of them are probably unorganized.
Yeah.
But I often see this NABL registration or accreditation is often put on some of these labs, right?
Right.
So I was very fascinated to find out in your paper that it is actually not a government body and it is a voluntary accreditation. So could you give us a sense of what NABL is, why did it come up, and why is there no government registration or accreditation here?
Right. So the NABL, you're right, is the National Accreditation Board for Testing and Calibration Laboratories. It's actually an autonomous body under the Quality Council of India. So accreditation with the NABL is not mandated by law, which means that of the approximately 1 or 1.1 lakh labs that we have in India, various sources say that NABL accredited labs are only 1% or even less than 1%.
Wow. Okay.
Right. Out of these 1.1 lakh labs. So very few labs are actually going and getting NABL accreditation. NABL has its own standards, has its own rigorous standards for accreditation. And as far as I am aware, these standards are pretty comparable to international standards. So NABL accreditation reflects seriousness in terms of quality compliance, quality assurance, etc. Like I said before, that is one criteria for organized, unorganized sector distinction, is that a lot of large private chains have only NABL accreditation as a mode to build and portray their credibility. Therefore, they do in the absence of otherwise regulation, and therefore only a few of these do acquire NABL accreditation.
Right. And the Quality Council of India, under which this NABL comes, that has nothing to do with the government, is it?
No, the Quality Council of India is not under the government. It's an autonomous non-profit body. So it does various sorts of assessments, impact assessments, etc. And it does not come under any department or any ministry of the government per se. No.
So, just to follow up on this before we move on to COVID, so why is there no government accreditation? Was it tried and it failed, or was there no need felt? What was the reason there?
Right. So, what was happening there is that the central government actually came up with a law called the Clinical Establishments Act, 2010. Now, the Clinical Establishments Act is basically, the objective of the act was to register and regulate clinical establishments. Now, when we say clinical establishments, it covers your whole ambit. There's a whole bunch of establishments which are covered, which can, starting from your normal regular clinics to your maternity homes to diagnostic centers. And there is a clear definition of what constitutes a clinical establishment. Under this law, for you to be a clinical establishment, you have to register with a local authority, and then you have to comply with certain minimum standards that have been recently prescribed with regard to the equipment that you're supposed to have, with regard to the infrastructure you're supposed to have, the technical staff that you're supposed to have, etc. Where we run into a little bit of a problem is that healthcare, hospitals, dispensaries, healthcare in general, is a state subject in India. It's under the states have exclusive powers to make laws on this subject. So the Clinical Establishments Act then has been promulgated under Article 249 of the Constitution, which is that the central government in some cases can make laws on state subjects in the national interest. Now here what happens is that the states then have the power to accept or reject the law. In furtherance of which, what has happened with the Clinical Establishments Act is that only 11 states have enacted it. And there is, in terms of papers, literature, reports, etc., there is consensus on the fact that even in these 11 states, enforcement of this law is minimal to nothing. Now, firstly, the law also doesn't really create a framework which can assure quality to to a adequate extent, because under the law also the requirements are very minimal. There is all you have to do to set up a clinical establishment and start operating it is to first get a registration, which is first you get a provisional registration for which there is no inquiry conducted, there is no inspection conducted. There's an application, you fill out the application, it's scrutinized, and you get a provisional registration which is valid for 6 months. Within these 6 months, you have to show to the local authority that you have complied with all the standards, the minimum standards that are applicable to you under the Act, be it in terms of infrastructure, the amount of space you have, the amount of equipment you have, etc. Upon doing that, you get a permanent registration. And once you do get a permanent registration, the Act does not provide for this permanent registration being reviewed periodically, or there being periodic inspections, or you being asked to submit evidence of continued compliance with the conditions of your initial registration, etc. So that in that respect, the Act is fairly bare bones. And also there is no grievance redressal for patients specifically under the Act. So I cannot invoke this Act's framework to if I have a grievance. So that is the regulatory framework governing diagnostic labs, which is another reason we see a large unorganized sector, because there is no or very minimal enforcement.
Interesting. All right. So thanks, Siddharth. Now let's move to the regulatory framework for testing with respect to COVID-19. Now we know that it is not the same as the regulatory framework for non-COVID scenario, right? And we've heard about ICMR being the body which is regulating it. So Ameya, could you tell us what's actually happening with respect to COVID-19? And we know that the testing is very less, but still the private labs are not being used to adequate capacity. So what's happening here? Could you please decode this for us?
Yeah. So basically, the way it kind of started, the whole thing started off is that, like Siddharth said, that there is no actual regulatory framework as such, which says that, okay, which can kind of control all testing labs in the country. So you are starting off when the beginning of the pandemic in India, at least, there was a lot of confusion as to who is who can actually test a particular, COVID sample or something like that. So in the beginning, what happened was that, like as per the existing regulatory framework, no lab should actually require any permission from anybody to do a COVID test. So, like you mentioned that you have lots of labs in Bangalore, you could have practically walked into any of these labs which claim whatever they want to claim, and you should have been able to get the COVID test done. But then what happened was that, and to this effect, I think there are state governments which also kind of gave out some, notifications saying that, then basically they went and said that no private lab should do it. That came in a little later, but that came in primarily because the government used the Epidemic Diseases Act and the Disaster Management Act. And together, using these two acts, they basically put ICMR in charge. So they said ICMR is the body who will take all these decisions, and they will coordinate with the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, and that's how it will go ahead. So what happened was that from little or no regulation, it suddenly went into one central authority which will decide what needs to be done from here on. What happened basically was like, instead of clarifying things, it led to more confusion, because the ICMR started looking into all the nitty-gritties, saying that, okay, what is it that the labs need to do? So I think in the beginning, what happened was that the reason why ICMR is given this charge is because it has something called as a Viral Research and Diagnostic Laboratories Network. So this is a Government of India setup, and it has labs in multiple states, basically all the states almost, except maybe somewhere in the northeast or something, where they have limited labs. But they have, a very well-detailed setup saying that if there is any viral disease, this is the lab where the testing should happen.
All these are government bodies, or
yeah,
they are
the VRDL network is under the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, and it is led by ICMR. So ICMR is the apex body which manages this whole network. So I think this is kind of a scheme that has been in progress since 2010, 2012, where slowly, we had lesser number of labs, and then ICMR got more funding and put in the network to actually expand this whole thing. The idea behind the VRDL is basically to, in case there is, because you can do this testing more often and at a local level, in case there is a disease outbreak, you can catch it early, right? Mm-hmm. So this kind of works for other viral diseases where, they have been there in the past, you know about it, you know what kits to use. You basically keep your infrastructure ready in all places, and any sample that you get, you basically test it and you move ahead. Now, what happened with VR? So I think the ICMR was planning to use the VRDL to do all COVID-related testing in India. But what happened, and to that effect, then there were these state government notifications as well, saying that no private lab should get into testing, right? So now, the government has put ICMR in charge. ICMR says we'll use our network. Private labs, stay off. Don't come into this. So now suddenly, probably this could have been, I don't know, Harleen is a better person, but this could have been challenged in the court at that point or something. So no private lab actually ventured into it because there was also some kind of confusion. And then ICMR basically, every single day, because it was put in charge, started coming up with one guideline after the other. So, you just have notifications every single day, and, it would be like, do this, do that, do this, do that. So then it kind of, I think somewhere when the lockdown was announced, around that time, ICMR realized that its own VRDL network is not sufficient and they need to rope in the private labs. So then they kind of, started off saying that, okay, it started off with actual, listing of how many labs are there. What do these labs have? What infrastructure do they have? They sent out this notification saying that tell us whether you have PCR machines or no. Whether you have, how much reagents do you have in your lab? That kind of information is what ICMR started collecting. So it was kind of ICMR basically wanted, it had been put in charge, and they just wanted to kind of, and to be honest, ICMR has not done this before. ICMR is a medical research body. It does a very good job. The National Institute of Virology, which is in Pune, is basically under the ICMR, and NIV, comes up with very good research work all throughout the year. And, being the premier institute for virology in the country, it was natural that a lot of, expertise was with NIV and hence ICMR. So NIV had to be roped in at some point in time, from the beginning. It was there. But now when you started putting, asking the private labs to jump in, ICMR kind of took a approach saying that everything you do needs to be, needs to come through us, needs to be okayed from our side. So then they said that, okay, if you're procuring any kits, that kit needs to be approved by us.
And then there were price caps also, right?
Price caps basically came in later, but first they said that every kit needs to be approved by us. So then they were like, okay, if it is FDA approved, US FDA approved, then you don't need an approval. But anything that you do in India, anything that is developed in India, it basically needs to be approved by us. So what happened over there was that now, when I've spoken to people who manufacture these kits as well, basically people started submitting their kits to ICMR, ICMR had no other place but to go to NIV and say, please test these kits. While NIV was, kind of, there is one more thing where whatever the VDRL was testing, everything had to be sent to NIV to get a confirmation test done. So only after that was done, somebody was actually said that you are positive for COVID. So NIV had this massive backlog of these tests. And then ICMR also gave them an additional burden saying that now every test kit that is developed in the country needs to be approved by you guys. And hence it will be approved by ICMR. So I think at some point there were some 60 or 80 vendors who were actually sending kits to ICMR and saying that approve this. So ICMR in its own, in its attempt to kind of regulate this whole thing, it just created more and more bottlenecks. So unless some kit could actually be approved by ICMR, no private lab could test it, or use it. Yeah. Then again, after the kit is approved, then it had to go through this whole production process. And, so all those things kind of started all these bottlenecks were created by ICMR, and then that kind of led to delay in testing.
Right. I mean, I think I can clearly see one thing about a government failure here, right? The ICMR also acting as a regulatory body and also
Yes.
a service provider, also as a compliance body, which
Yes.
is regulating which tests, which kits are okay and all that, right? So whenever you have one government body doing all these functions, it's a classic case of government failure. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. So
If I may just add, like the whole
yeah.
thing is that ICMR didn't, when it came to approving of labs, it hasn't done anything specific. So it has basically just approved labs that under NABL accreditation are doing RNA testing, right? So they don't have any special COVID testing facilities as such. Like they're not. They have testing facilities which they use for testing of HIV. NABL has approved them, right? And then ICMR says, okay, fine, you can start doing this testing. But this whole there is an approval process that has to happen through ICMR. So the lab needs to apply to ICMR, and then ICMR has to do some paperwork which they are not very clear about what exactly it is. And then they come out and say, okay, fine, you can do COVID testing. So it's basically duplication of work, which they could have just sent out one notification saying that all NABL labs which do RNA testing can now do COVID testing, and that would be it. But there are some 200 over 250 labs which had to go through this whole process saying that, we need ICMR approval, and ICMR approved it. And then, so it's just like one more bottleneck created by ICMR saying that you need to go.
But this number sounds very small for me, right? Like I am assuming there are no shortage of RT-PCR kits in India now. There are many companies which are ready to produce it.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are more than 250 testing labs in India which would be able to procure these within India.
Yes.
So there has to be some other bottleneck, right? Maybe is it because of the price cap which has been put, which makes it not so lucrative for any private company to actually take this up? Arlene, do you want to take this?
Yeah. So I just wanted to add that from the time that we wrote this article, which was June 20th of sorts, till now, ICMR has approved about 100 odd additional private labs. So one bottleneck clearly is ICMR, which is doing testing of NABL approved labs, which is basically approving NABL approved labs again for COVID.
All right. So, Harley, next question to you itself. Exactly what is the market failure with testing in India? Why is there a problem with the system that we had earlier where they are doing self-regulation, NABL accreditation is happening, some of them are with NABL, most of them aren't. So what exactly is the problem with that structure?
Sure. So the fact that there are two market failures. Okay, the first one exists generally for diagnostic sector in India, which is information asymmetry. It's prevalent even in healthcare market when we go to our doctors, right? So information asymmetry is something where a patient does not have enough information to make rational decisions about the best choice for them. So for example, for testing, if I will have to get my own blood test done, I'd rather probably depend on my doctor's choice of lab, or go for one of these chains which I feel is better than the others, right? So that's one problem. I don't know what is happening inside a lab. I don't know how reliable that lab is. So through regulation, this problem should have been solved through. So Clinical Establishments Act should have been able to tell me that these are the recognized government recognized private labs near you, and you can visit them because they have gone through some scrutiny, right? But that, as Siddharth explained, has not happened. The other problem, especially in case of COVID, is that there's this problem of public goods. So in COVID, getting a test is not important just for an individual. It is also important for the community as a whole, because it's a public health problem. It's infectious. We don't know much about it. So if I, for some reason of not being able to say pay for the test, I'm not able to know whether I have COVID or not, I am also going to probably infect 10 to 15 more individuals, right? So that problem arises in case of infectious diseases. These are the two market failures in medical testing in India, broadly.
Right. So these market failures are at play, and we are seeing how they are impacting the situation. Could you tell us, any of you, about the specific role of this price cap? Also, how did it come into being, and have you read anything about this specifically and its impact on the overall testing rate in India?
Right. So if I may only add to this, so the testing price cap for testing was introduced by ICMR after doing certain deliberations with the private lab bodies that they had access to. Okay, so between 11th March to 20th March, ICMR did not allow any private lab to work for it for COVID testing. But later on, when it realized that it has to let in private lab testing, it was afraid of high prices of such testing. So it wanted to regulate it, and after certain deliberations, it came to this value of 4,500 rupees per RT-PCR test. Okay, and that was notified. So this is like a cap over which no private lab can go while charging for their tests. This price cap definitely had like people had issues of accessibility with these price caps also, and it has now looking back, we see that certain states are able to procure the tests at much lower rates as well. So this setting up of a limit was kind of a problem, because in a lot of places 4,500 is the amount that you give. I mean, unless the state government intervenes, a person has to pay 4,500. And because if you get if you get SARS-CoV, you have to get tested for at least, I think, 3 times. That's quite a high amount for most people. So accessibility issue was raised. Actually, it was raised before the Supreme Court of India also, which did ask the government to make it more accessible price wise.
But how will that work if there's a price cap put? Then why will a private company actually agree to do the test, given the fact that testing for COVID-19 is a very risky thing, and systems are not in place, safety is an issue, transport of the sample is an issue, and all that, right? So didn't that, and in fact the court even wanted to even reduce it further, right? They wanted to make it even nearly zero. So wouldn't that have an effect on the testing rates?
So for sure, we do not proclaim that the test can be made zero for everybody. Sadly, we would like that to happen, but that's not possible. But the problem with this setting of 4,500 is the lack of transparency more than anything else. So the meetings where this 4,500 cap was decided, the records have not been made public. We do not know what were the considerations that went inside it. So because some certain states have been able to procure these tests at lower costs, right, at 2,000 also, maybe it at scale, because the states are buying it at scale, it is possible to reduce the prices further. So the whole question is not about what should the price be. You and I, none of us do have that kind of data to determine such a answer. But the whole point is that when you make such an important public health decision as a de facto regulator, you should follow all the transparency and accountability principles, and this information should be made public of how come this was decided, and then also what the states can do to put it even lower.
Yeah, I think what happened in the beginning, like, when this price cap was set, I think a lot of people from the private sector actually, came out and defended that number, saying that this is my cost of doing it. And, to make some margin on it, I have to charge it at 4,500 and all that. But I think as, even Telangana and all that, they reduced it to 2,200. And after that, I've not heard anybody protest. So I think there is definitely a good margin. And even I think MyLab, which was the first Indian test provider, which was approved by ICMR as well, they also claimed that their test would cost like 750 rupees or something like that. So a price cap of 4500 was a good margin. I do understand there are a lot of risks with it. In the beginning, I think there were people who were very scared of doing it, and also one reason why you mentioned that there are why only 258 labs. I think one reason is that you need to have certain safety protocols in the lab, and it's not just instrumentation but also personal training that needs to happen if you want to run a RNA PCR test. So basically, you should be experienced running the likes of HIV PCR tests or something like that. And but HIV is not that infectious. COVID is even more. So taking into account all that, I still think 4500 was not a bad price. Although, like Hadleen said, that you should have been more transparent as to how have you arrived at it. But that should not be like I don't think private entities can actually say that because you put a price cap, I cannot enter into this. Probably one more point, although we didn't mention it in the paper, is that you could they have now gone to other like research institutes like DRDO institutes and CCMB in Hyderabad and said that why don't you develop a test? I think IIT Delhi has developed a test. So all these things where ICMR actually said that you need to have a kit to do this has actually increased the cost of doing the test itself. What they could have, again, as a research institute, ICMR could actually have said that, listen, this is the protocol that you can follow. These are the SOPs we will give you to ensure that, you follow. These are the safety protocols that you need to follow. And, labs should be able to do the test themselves, because PCR is a very common test. A lot of people do it in the country. Like you said, there are so many thousands of labs, probably in Bangalore alone. So it's a easy thing to do. There is a risk with it, yes, but still, I don't think price point, the pricing cap is a deterrent for a private entity to enter into this testing area. And I think that is quite seen right now, because a lot of testing is happening in the private setup right now as well. So
cool. So towards the end, so what do you think is the way ahead? What can ICMR or the government or state governments do to quickly ramp up testing in India?
I think the bigger problem has moved away from the testing infrastructure, and it has actually now moved to whether you really want to test, because the state governments clearly do not want to test anymore, with the fear that rising numbers means they can't open up things. So that attitude is what
the moral hazard problem. Yeah, so a lot of people want to keep their numbers low. So,
everybody wants to keep their numbers low, so it's like even I think even contact tracing and all that are the bigger problems right now. And I think that is what state governments and even ICMR should probably be focusing on that. But I think their focus is now on the vaccine, and they're like, we will get a vaccine.
But what about this scenario that, let's say, it would be very easy for anyone in India to walk into any lab and get themselves tested for COVID-19. That's not the scenario currently, right? Governments have put regulations on who can actually get tested and things like that, right? So do you think moving towards that equilibrium would be a better approach, Harleen?
Yes. So actually, again, since June till July, we have increased our testing capacity for sure. So it was 119 per million tests per million population when we wrote the paper, and right now it's been reported as 190 per million population, which is a huge jump for us, which we were not able to do in the past 3 months. But having said that, you are right that gatekeeping at the level of who gets the test also, which is again an SOP which is given by ICMR, and even the doctors are bound by it. So doctors have to follow the guidelines given by ICMR on who should be prescribed RT-PCR testing. So that probably at this stage should be gotten rid of by now. That's one of the things that I feel is important. Secondly, ICMR does not need to gatekeep all the entry points for private labs. Even now, the percentage of private labs that to the ratio of private labs to government labs which have gotten ICMR approval for testing is 30 is to 70. So that's quite low. It's the opposite of what the actual capacity, where the actual capacity lies. So we should allow, there are approximately 4,000 NABL labs in India, and I don't think there's a requirement for ICMR to go and test back how many NABL approved labs for COVID require ICMR approval. Those kind of things should be gotten rid of as soon as possible.
All right. Any other points any of you would like to mention?
If I may just add a small point to that, we've been talking practicality and what is happening on the ground, but I'd also like to mention that I think building state capacity for any sort of regulation or policy requires backing by a framework, a policy or a legal framework that is comprehensive. So just to put what Ameya and Harleen were saying about transparency into a little bit of context, to say that going forward, even the decisions that are taken by the ICMR, both on the supply side and the demand side, should subscribe to a framework where there are certain demands made of the ICMR, of transparency, of publishing things, of consultations, etc. So that is important.
All right, all three of you, this was really insightful. I'm sure our listeners will enjoy listening to this, and we'll link the paper to the episode. Please do read it and let us know if you learned something new out of this episode. Thank you, Harleen, Siddhartha, and Ameya.
Thank you.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.
I hope you enjoyed that show. I'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Paytm Money and Intel. Before I tell you about some of the shows that we have for you this week, I really wanted to really point out the incredible efforts of our host and our team. We've been able to maintain most of our production schedule in this lockdown, which is going into 4 months now. And I couldn't be happier with the fact that our hosts and team have been able to just get all of this stuff out so incredibly well. So I just really wanted to call them out for that and thank them for their support in this time. And since I spent so much time talking about that, I don't want to get you out of here quickly. Let me give you a quick update on a few shows that you should check out this week. On Siders, we had Amish Tripathi, really interesting discussion, both of them dive deep into history. Monty Panesar was on Edges and Sledges, another really cool show. On Advertising is Dead, Tanmay Bhatt showed up. That was a cool episode. Malini Agarwal, also probably better known as Miss Malini, showed up on Absolutely Right. It's just been an absolutely gangbusters week in terms of the kind of guests we've had and the conversations we've had on the network. Please do check some stuff out. And with that, we hope to see you again next week.
Namaskar, this is Ashish Vidyarthi. Yes, my friend, these are challenging times, but in these challenging times, we can create something extraordinary. Do take time to listen to my podcast, Begin the Journey. Available on the IVM Podcast, website, app, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Remember, we have a great opportunity called life. Cheers.